Essentially, data and evidence are answering different types of policy questions. So if we take an example in the education sector, data will give you how many schools there are, how many teachers are. It will also tell you how these schools perform. It wouldn't tell you why does the school perform well. So just data on the performance of the schools tells you as a decision maker very little about why that is the case. And that's where we need research and evidence to come in.
Extremely important. It's about our residents. It's about the people of this country and the societal changes. And data on its own cannot do it. Evidence on its own cannot do it. And how do we bring the data and the evidence communities together? And I believe knowledge brokers such as Space, you can do it.
With AI coming in, how much reliance do you think people will naturally lean on versus what's easily accessible? My name is Zafeer Ravat. I am the Director of Programs and Impact at the Pan-African Collective for Evidence. And with me, I have two very esteemed colleagues who we're very lucky to have. I'll leave you to introduce yourselves.
I'm Laurenz Mahlanza-Langer. I'm the Executive Director of the Pan-African Collective for Evidence. We are a knowledge broker based in South Africa, trying to contextualize, synthesize, and translate evidence and data for decision makers. And that means we meet lots of amazing, hardworking, wise decision makers, such as Zeenat, sitting next to me, who I met 6 years ago, and who's leading an amazing portfolio of work in the data space in the Western Cape. So, hello, Zeenat.
Good day, I'm Zeenat Ishmail, and I'm working at the Western Cape government. I'm in the Department of the Premier and the head of the Provincial Data Office.
So, we're looking to bridge the data and evidence communities, right? I think I would start this by just asking kind of why does this matter in practice and what role does it have, in terms of the work we do and supporting evidence use?
Probably good to start with the problem itself so that we're not shooting down at a straw dog. I do think it's fair to say that if we look at the broader ecosystem, that entities that produce data look different from entities that produce research, from entities that produce synthesis. And even PACE as a knowledge broker, we've been traditionally geared towards synthesizing research and evaluations, but not data. And it's a tricky situation if our field has organized in that way, because we know that decision makers like you're not looking for one type of evidence or one type of data. You look at a policy area and you have decision-making needs, not really actually evidence needs, like need to inform a decision, and you're looking to the community to provide you with the relevant information. And suddenly we have a situation where you have to come to PACE for synthesis, and then you have to come to the South African Monitoring Evaluation Association for evaluations, and you have to come to ID Insights to get data. So it is a very splintered context. At least that's my feeling. I'm not sure how Zeenat you see it, but that splintering between data and evidence communities, that's where the trickiness comes in.
Yeah, from my perspective, this need became more and more apparent, especially during my academic work when developing the data governance model for institutionalization in public sector. The research and the reading on data and evidence gap, especially during the tracking of the Millennium Development Goals and the transition to the Sustainable Development Goals. But the same also holds true for indices like the Human Development Index and others at a very subnational level. So, whilst in my academic work, I made recommendations to give effect to data policy implications, it matters because, government can have collaborators. We can do research. But with knowledge brokers and academics, in a government-wide context and in a province-wide context, that is vital in being responsive to the global, national, local policy context, especially in a fiscus-constrained environment. From a public sector perspective, that one has to work within a policy, planning, budget cycle. Obviously, we need to focus on service delivery outcomes. And extremely important, keep one's eye on the ball. It's about our residents. It's about the people of this country and the societal changes. And data on its own cannot do it. Evidence on its own cannot do it. And how do we bring the data and the evidence communities together. And I believe knowledge brokers, such as PACE, you can do it.
Well, I think we're at least trying. But I really love how you framed this, right? The eye, to not take the eyes off the ball. The big prize is improving service delivery, decreasing poverty and inequality. And then there's a need for us to be responsive. And I think responsive, for me, is a key word here.
Yeah.
And we are working under the REAP partnership, which is a responsive evidence systems for African policy needs. I got it. And that's our starting point. Not to say we're bringing you only synthesis, we're bringing you only data. Not to be responsive.
Now, Laurenz, as you know, I'm a data baby, right? And my work in data governance, I recommend the levers in data governance, which the evidence communities surely also have levers. Levers such as collaboration, where data is a central pathway in the provision of service delivery results. But very importantly, what is our shared purpose for sustainable results? So that is where I nudge the knowledge brokers, like PACE, can establish at multiple platforms, not only with the evidence communities. So the next big event that PACE hosts, whether it's in South Africa or whether it's in Africa, whether it's Uganda, whether it's Benin, Kotoa, or that's Morocco.
That would be nice. That would be really nice.
It is bring the data community into the discussion. And even if it's one strand in your program where that discussion is much more than only the evidence production or the evidence generation. Evidence-informed decision-making needs to be underpinned by the data and the evidence integration.
One of the things that I would like to get a better understanding on, right, is there's this common goal, as you mentioned, right? So we want to improve service delivery. Ultimately, we want to, help better lives. Why do you think we are in a situation now that it feels disjointed, right? Is there kind of a reason that you think? Or?
I don't think anybody has done this on purpose. So it's not that, there's what's this big conspiracy that the data people don't want to work with the evidence people and vice versa. I think there's a couple of reasons why we have that structural divide. It starts with, I think, that this is really different professions. So the degrees you do in order to become a specialist in data versus the degrees for evidence synthesis and evaluations are quite different. And that then translates into different professional cultures, professional norms, different associations, just different bunch of professionals that essentially have their own community. And that translates also into structure. So if you look at government, without wanting to blame government, but we have Statistics South Africa, an entity that largely does with data. We have an evaluation system that largely looks at evaluation. We've got a knowledge management branch. So you can kind of filter that through, even from an administration setup. And then you can look at universities, they'll have it separate. And then it's probably no surprise that the people and the companies and entities these people form also have set themselves apart. At least that's how I see it, but maybe what is your experience coming out of the data world? Have I misrepresented that too much?
From my side, it's about co-creation. And if we can co-create together through those levers, through those partnerships, then it is about creating that data and evidence ecosystem, whether, irrespective which player you are, or irrespective which actor you are in the data and evidence value chain. Or let me phrase it better, in the policy data and evidence value chain. I'm just nudging PACE to bring in the data flavor into the evidence discussion. And we've been doing well in a capacity as a government official. We had the open day, and the open day proved very well. We had our range of stakeholders there. We had specialists in spatial data. There are specialists in evidence generation, and then we have the statistics stream, and also technology. So there's efforts, and but the efforts are also beyond our own little world. Let's go to Africa and look at the developments and how we can influence that space, because sustainable development is much broader than where we find ourselves on a subnational level or on a national level. Thank you.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think that nudge is very well taken, and in a way, I think we've dreamt together, also with Zafeer and other colleagues. What you want is to have a dashboard where a government colleague can look at the real-time data of school performance, where schools are located in one dashboard. And then we've got our beloved evidence maps, where we have the bubbles with all the evidence living in real time. And then we've got lots of in-between individual evaluations, more aggregated data points at a national level. And that needs to be brought together. And so I think that's a very much shared dream. And also I think it's shared challenge, because we know that large language models are already doing some of that. So they merge data with evidence without really thinking more to it, without understanding the methodological limitations that data doesn't tell you what works, but also what works without data on the diagnostic of the problem and how it's being disaggregated doesn't help either. So that's a shared challenge. And on your second point, I also completely agree that this is not something that can be done in isolation. It needs to be done in partnerships, and we need continental, regional partnerships to move that forward, because it's a system, a structure divided at subnational, national, regional, continental, global level. And that also means that the response of trying to connect these communities needs to flow through these layers as well, in my opinion.
That's really interesting, and I was fortunate to be there, part of the Open Data Day. And I think one of the things is, like, one of my key reflections, it's something I really enjoyed, right? I think everything from the way it was set up to the way it went. But what I did find also, there was really an eagerness to learn from each other. But with AI coming in, right, how much reliance do you think people will naturally lean on versus what's easily accessible, or otherwise, what do we think that that the role could be moving forward?
I'd be honest, I think humans are humans. We go for the salient, the low-hanging fruit. So the more convenient tool will in all likelihood always make it. And I think that's our job as a community, both the data and evidence community, to communicate better the risks of letting AI merge data and evidence forth without understanding the methodological implications and risks in that. And that comes, I think, back to the point that feels like it's resurfacing community building and partnerships, right? It doesn't, AI is a big field, a big world, a lot of money. And if we don't speak with one voice as a community of people wanting to support governments to use any form of information responsibly, we will be too small, too splintered, too disorganized. So to me, again, it comes back to this building a community, the open days, the Africa Evidence Network. I believe you both are attending a couple of conferences on the continent this year to speak exactly about this. So to me, that is a starting point. Not the methods, not the data itself, not the studies in the evidence world. It's really building a partnership, building a community, in my opinion.
From a government official perspective, I would say a responsible and ethical use of AI. We think a government does have a governance policy framework for AI, and it speaks about, how do you govern the data that's being used in AI, and how do you govern the AI, the technology in itself. And those are two areas that we all need to use as guardrails and very importantly also what other practice notes or guidelines are being put out for the proper use of AI, and that from further from in line with my academic work and that work which I am partnering with PACE, it is about, being cautious in terms of that AI don't replace the human thought processes. That's for me extremely important, that we are not forgetting about our own intellectual abilities and our own intellectual capacities, and we continue to think of ourselves in very simple terms.
Yeah. That's a really nice point, and I think the role of governance is becoming increasingly more important with the more, with more AI and also access to different types of data, right? Like 20, 30 years ago, I'm not sure that, you could get enough as much information as you can now. So yeah, I think why do you think that it's the case that data governance? Do you think it's because there's been such a big spark in the amount of data that is available now that help formalize and get data communities more organized, or do you think there's something else underlying that?
There's a history to it, and that is the emergence of the United Nations Statistical Development System, that would speak about data, have divisions around data classifications, data quality standards, whether it is the Africa region, and they have a very coherent way of working together, and then you have the European economic system also. So Africa has one of the key frameworks that we work with or work from is the South African Statistic Quality Assessment Framework. And that framework guides us in terms of how we actually have good quality statistics, and more so also how we can have good quality administrative data. And that is where I'm leaning towards and saying, where does evidence governance come into play? And then perhaps that is another chapter of our lives.
So essentially, data and evidence are answering different types of policy questions. So if we take an example in the education sector, data will give you a lot of information on the process or the diagnostic. It will tell you how many schools there are. It will tell you how many teachers are at the schools. It will also tell you how these schools perform. But, for example, it wouldn't tell you why does the school perform well. So just data on the performance of the schools tells you as a decision maker very little about why that it's the case. And that's where we need research and evidence to come in. And if you think that through, if you wanted to change something about the problem you've diagnosed, then we need interventions. And again, interventions, we can't really answer the value and the impact of an intervention is just on the raw primary data. Again, we need research and evidence and evaluations of an intervention. Of course, those evaluations themselves are again based on data. So an evaluation of an intervention to try to increase, for example, academic results at schools would collect data on, say, teacher performance as well as learning outcomes. So it comes a full circle. And the main point is essentially that in any form of policy area, we have different questions, different decision-making needs, and we need a combination of data and evidence to address those.
I'll see if I can pull a few strings. But I think there's enough voices in terms of bringing policy and data together. And Pali Lotela, you always speak about, how do you change your policies using the data, using the evidence, and perhaps the discussion is about, what is the limitations in certain data sets and what's the limitations in our evidence production, and that discussion, so we can have a shared purpose to sustainable results.
I think, again, this is not taking our eyes off the prize, right? It's, as you say, policy. We're looking at policy, data, and evidence that's supposed to serve policy. So we have the same objective, and that also should mean we should share our mission and vision, our practices, our cultures better.
That's why we need knowledge brokers. So I think that role, I think, Laurenz, maybe you can tell us kind of the role you see knowledge brokers having in this kind of bridging together.
Yeah, of course. I think, there's not one definition of a knowledge broker, so I don't want to say this is a broker, you're not a broker. But I think the underlying function is exactly that, bridging communities, creating connections, and being responsive to the policy needs. So a broker's role essentially is to look ahead and see what policy priorities are coming up or have been stated by decision makers. In South Africa, our National Development Plan, it's a sub-national level, provincial priorities and plans. And then the broker's job is to have a responsive knowledge base in place so that when we know we'll get a request from the administration because they have a 5-year goal, for example, to build 20 more schools and increase the matric rate by X percentage, you can anticipate what type of questions they will ask you. And then we need to be ready that the knowledge base is in place. And within that, it's so crucial that that knowledge base includes the whole value chain, from data to evidence to research to synthesis to evaluations, whatever we want to call it, and slice and dice these different methodologies. But it all needs to be ready so that we can be responsive to when our policymakers knock on our door and say, hey, can you advise us on how to design this policy, how to implement this program? Because that's a price, as Zeenat says.
I think you guys' journey has been it's going to be 5 years now. Sorry, I'm so bad at counting years.
21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26.
6 years, yeah, wow. Throughout this journey, I think, what would you say were your biggest learnings? And if you had to reflect kind of on how the processes have been and just also the movements, right, that have been happening.
And that is a completely different journey. That was a journey of continuously co-creating together. How do you use what PACE has at their disposal? And as the head of the Provincial Data Office, I can use that and optimize it due to our own limitations, our own fiscal constraints. And for example, one of the key takeaways for me was how we actually took the evidence maps and make that a key learning across other government departments, and then helping other government departments to ensure that they know what evidence are available and what are not available. But more so, we actually took the evidence map and we can actually say what data sources are available, because we use an evidence map on data sources against policy priorities. So my response to you is about collaboration, co-creation. Not only a data ecosystem, it's not only about the evidence ecosystem, it's bringing the two together for service delivery results and societal change. And that is a kind of a principle, or it was embedded in the understanding of what we want to achieve together.
Yeah, I could have not said this better. I have much to add. The only thought is that I find it striking is that we needed also 6 years to be able to have this conversation and feel like we've actually substantiated that you can connect the two. So there's something about first doing the actual work and then reflecting and figuring it out rather than going off on a hunch that you can connect. I think under the REAP project that I mentioned earlier, Responsive Evidence Systems for African Policy Needs, we have shown that you can connect. It's not an abstract idea, and that allows us to be sitting here and having this podcast. And yeah, it's a nice moment to be able to reflect on that.
I think one of the nice things to come out from this conversation, right, is like, I think just to be able to nuance it and articulate kind of how this might look and how this might go, is really insightful. What do you feel like were certain challenges over the 6 years, right, in particular, that you found? And similarly, were there any specific enablers that you thought really accelerated the way, you were able to meet together and develop these things?
I think Zeenat has mentioned quite a bit of that already with her wisdom. Enablers, definitely collaboration, co-creation, having always an eye on the prize, understanding the governance framework for it, so not just doing it in isolation. And then I think challenges is the structural inequalities that do translate into fairly, a technical learning curve, and that's not everybody's cup of tea, which is fair enough. Right? If I've trained for 30 years to specialize in a certain methodology, maybe there's no need for me to learn something new, and that's perfectly fine. So I think it's about finding the types of people in both communities that are open to trying something new, which not always works out, but at least to give it a try. That would be my reflections.
Yeah, so from me it is, capacity building for learning, balancing what is traditional methods of learning to what the knowledge broker brings to the table. It's all about the social platforms and the online platforms, and it is all different type of unstructured way of learning. Balancing the two, I think that was a challenge at the start, but we conquered it. And, it's also about the evidence product development. We used to, in government, we used to only doing evaluations, but we challenged it also that evaluation is not the only evidence method that are going to give you evidence, whether you need to redesign a program, whether you maintain a program, innovate a program, terminate a program, or sustain a program. There are other evidence methods, and that voice is coming through. And partnership and collaboration is not always easy. You have to go through your stormy roads to after difficulty always comes ease. So, and limited resourcing, can occasionally hinder scaling, whether the resourcing it is people resourcing or funding.
Zeenat, now when you just mentioned, kind of these stormy roads, right? If we have two new organizations looking to work together, right? What advice would you give? So if you have an evidence community and a data community, wherever it could be, right? What would be the first advice that comes to your mind, for dealing with these stormy times? Because, I think, actually, let me just stop there, rather.
I always reflect of those people that I've learned from. There's a number of people, but if I look at the one book that Binker Gere wrote around strengthening the statistical decision-making value chain, I think is a good read. Punting that policy development and policy making is not in isolation of data production and evidence production. So it is about data producers or evidence producers and the data and evidence users and the data evidence suppliers, right? Within that particular, whether it's an economic value chain, whether it is a social value chain, but that elements, if we can create an enabling environment for that ecosystem to operate with that shared purpose, and that shared purpose towards the sustainable development results of our beautiful country.
What can I add to
I
that?
have no idea. No idea. It's mind blown with you. I mean, I feel very energetic and passionate after your great monologues, Zeenat. Wow. So yeah, I think moving forward, what does this all mean? Where do we go from here? What are the next steps to look forward to?
I think there's a couple of steps in the pipeline, and I'm going first because I keep trying to come after Zeenat, which is very challenging. So I think, starting with this is now the first podcast. There will be more to come. So we do want to communicate this desire to bridge the community. There will also be more events, joint events like the Open Day, but also more regional events in the calendar. And I think in the background to this more front-facing work, at the back end we'll continue to live and breathe this. So we have at least another 2 years under REAP of trying to figure out in our subnational context in South Africa. And then lastly, I would say we'll continue to try to build a larger community. So REAP has been growing, we have been growing, our teams have been growing. So there's something around inspiring the next generation to live and breathe data and evidence as a shared journey.
Thanks so much. I think the theme here has always been it's harder to speak after the next person, and I have the difficult job of speaking last, which is terribly hard. Thank you if you're still listening. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next one.